Well, as we know, Daniel Andrews' right-hand man, the most senior Victorian public servant, the head of his department, resigned earlier today, as I outlined at the top of the show. And the decision came because he had to hand over those phone records. That's why I said they were so important, because it all hinged around that 6 minute, and it proved that he did call Graham Ashton at 1:17 p.m. And that's at odds with the evidence where he said, I couldn't recall, and all sorts of carry on. Victorian Liberal MP and Deputy Chair of the Public Accounts and Estimates Committee, Mr Richard Riordan, joins me now. Richard, great to have you on the show. I'll start with Eccles, but I won't spend a lot of time there. He's gone and there'll be a replacement. What I am perturbed, though, to hear tonight is there are a number of ministers who are not providing their records. There are a number of senior bureaucrats not providing their records. The only one really putting his records in was in the case of Eccles, and he's now gone, and the Premier and some of the Premier's staff. But all manner of other MPs are not as transparent.
Well, Peter, we can ask the question why, and I guess it's they've perhaps forgotten that they have the records, or they can't find the records, no one's gotten them the records. This is just turning into an ongoing circus. I mean, unless people like yourself and other journos turn up to continue asking these questions, the government, if they're not careful, are seriously going to put the credibility of their own inquiry seriously into question if it's taking the Parliament, in our case, when we get an opportunity to sit, and in your case, the journos turning up each day, to continue to ask these obvious questions. It almost seems improbable. The Premier's made much of 300,000 pages of documents, and yet, you know, a handful of pages from Telstra are the most important. It just keeps dragging on. It shows the level of deceit Andrews will go to keep this covered up. And as you said very, very clearly, it's not the initial crime, it's the cover-up. And this cover-up is going to go longer than the pandemic. We can see that now a mile away.
I want to go to another issue too. I raised it in the press conference today. There are claims that people connected to the Premier, either through departments or in his private office, notified the security companies who ended up getting these multi-million-dollar contracts. Now, there was correspondence in the middle of the National Cabinet meeting when Chris Eccles left, you know, in that last hour. There's correspondence at 12:30 that shows a company is trying to meet what will later on be declared to be the contract rules, have to do this training. They all race out to do it before the Prime Minister announces what they're going to do at 2:30 in the program. And it's a $30 million contract. Now, I find that extraordinary.
Well, look, from my experience in the public sector, prior to this, having done time as a volunteer board member at a local hospital, you know, we put out a contract for an $18,000 car, and I kid you not, trying to get a deal on that would take weeks and weeks of probity on car dealers and doing things. It is absolutely improbable that this state can spend tens of millions of dollars in less than 24 hours, and not one minister, not the Premier, no one remembers, no one recalls. I mean, that alone ought to hang this government in terms of its complete lack of responsibility with spending of government funds. Time and time again, we learn about this wicked virus and all the appropriate actions the Premier's taking, and yet spending tens of millions of dollars. And my understanding is many of these people employed have only been stood down, are still earning generous incomes. It's still costing the people of Victoria, and yet no one knows anything about it. And, you know, Daniel Andrews, to think that the boss, the guy at the top of the tree, in 3 months hasn't asked one question, has not demanded one answer from any of his senior bureaucrats and senior ministers, is absolutely beyond belief for any Victorian.
Well, is it anyone in the Parliament shut down, Richard Riordan? I've got to go quickly to your committee. You're the Deputy Chair of a committee. Andrew Crisp, on the 26th of August, he's the Head of Emergency Management Victoria, was with Lisa Neville, the Police Minister, direct report, relationship there. He says 3 times in your committee that he briefed her. He says, I was regularly briefing the Minister. He's required to, I might add, under the Act, that the private security would be used in the hotel quarantine program. He says, again, I briefed her on what was being planned. He said it 3 times, as I said. She never interrupted him once on this particular part of the evidence. She might have interrupted on other things, but she did not contest this at all. And last week, we had the circus of him now saying all of that he said to your committee was wrong, it never happened. He never briefed her at all. Now, the fact that he didn't brief her in these 2 critical days inside a state of emergency, I put to the Premier on Friday to say, under his own act, he's guilty of neglect and he should be stood aside. And the Premier, you know, danced around that one as well.
Yeah, he's done a lot of dancing. There might be a lot of dance schools closed in Victoria, but the Premier's leading the way in its recovery, I'll tell you that much. But look, not only that, Peter, the transcript from Hansard at that time, where it was nearly 2 pages of questions referencing the fact that the Emergency Services Commissioner was regularly briefing his minister. I asked multiple questions, all of them pertaining to, was that information flowing through to the minister and to the Premier? And he assured myself, he assured others on the committee that that was happening. Now, the fact that he's gone and retracted that following evidence given at the Coat inquiry absolutely demands that he and other senior ministers come back to PAEC to face very severe questions, because it completely changes the evidence. Because we're now, as Victorians, the evidence that we were given is wrong, that apparently no one was told, and we quite simply need to know. We cannot have our emergency services in a time of state of emergency and state of disaster with someone who's just not telling anybody. And if that's not the truth, and the ministers did know and the Premier did know, we absolutely need that clarified here in Victoria.
And of course, we're about to hit bushfire season, and on the weekend, the Premier extended the state of emergency and the state of disaster in Victoria for another month. Richard Riordan, keep on to all of this. Good luck trying to get them to reappear at your committee. Reappearances are not happening very often at the Coat inquiry. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Peter.